everybody. Welcome to another edition of Closed. Today, we are super excited to have with us Vishaan Chakrabarti. Vishaan is the founder and creative director of Practice for Architecture and Urbanism. It's a renowned architecture and urban planning firm dedicated to creating sustainable, equitable, and culturally vibrant cities. He's also wrote a book in a similar vein that we're going to talk about called The Architecture of Urbanity, Designing for Nature, Culture, and Joy. And in it, amongst many other really interesting arguments, which hopefully we'll get to some of them, he argues that urban design is kind of key to addressing social division and climate change. So, Vishaan, first off, thanks for being here.
Sure, my pleasure.
So I always like to start when we have really interesting guests, which I would categorize you as one of them. Walk us 2 minutes through your background. How did you kind of get into the architecture space? Was it in the all in the family, or did you come to it new? Where did you approach it from?
My parents, my dad was a scientist. My mother was a literature person and actually a classical Indian singer. And when we were young, we traveled a lot through various cities across the world because my dad had lectures and stuff to give. And so I just fell in love with cities and their architecture and the arts and culture more generally. Um, I studied engineering like a good Indian boy, was not a great engineering student, took a lot of art history classes along the way, ended up double majoring, and that just naturally led to architecture.
Um, how did you come to start your own architectural firm? Walk us through that journey really quickly.
That's a little unusual because I started as an architect at Skidmore, Mornings and Merrill, was an associate partner there, and then 9/11 happened and really felt I should go into public service, went to work for Mayor Bloomberg, was his Manhattan planning director in his first term, and then did a variety of things, wrote my first book, taught at Columbia. I became a partner at a firm called Shop Architects that did the Barclay Center, a very good architecture firm. And then about 10 years ago, almost now, it's hard to believe, I was about to turn 50 and I realized I just really wanted my own firm. And if I didn't do it then, I was never going to do it. And so, 2 kids, 2 mortgages, stepped off the precipice. And it's been great. It's been great. There's about 30 of us. We're doing really interesting work. It's everything I wanted and more.
Did you have, when you were thinking about taking the proverbial leap, which I can empathize with because I did the same thing roughly around 10 years ago, also leaving government service. Did you have a vision for what you wanted to create? Did you say to yourself, I love the places where I worked before, but I want to do a little something different, and this is the vision I have for it? Or did it come organically as you went, and you just knew you wanted to create something, and you let the vision come to you as you went?
A little bit of both. I knew that I wanted an architecture firm that was very much an architecture firm that also specifically advanced this idea of urbanity that I now write about in the book. And so some of that was in my head and it came out through the work. I don't think and I'm going to say we because there's a lot of people who work in the office that have been here since the beginning. I think we had like a specific architectural style in mind, for instance. That, I think there is a language to our work now that came more organically, that was not imposed top down by me, but actually came out of a kind of love of cities that, then naturally grew into projects like Domino and other things I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And so it was a little bit of both.
So I want to get to the book, which I think is a fascinating thesis, and it's as someone I don't live in the city anymore, unfortunately, but I spent probably roughly 20 years, half of my adult life in the city, and you don't think of living in the city as community based. I feel like myself and my friends, when you think about it, okay, when we finally want to settle down and enter a community, we go to the suburbs where we can then make friends and everybody's going to the same place. So how did it sounds like you were thinking about these ideas well before you wrote the book and before you started the firm. What was walk me through kind of like the thesis here and what influenced that thesis?
Sure. I mean, so I published a book in 2013 called The Country of Cities that was basically kind of a lot of what I learned being Manhattan planning director after 9/11 and trying to apply that to a more kind of nationwide setting. I've driven cross country. Well, now I've driven cross country almost 6 times. So I know the country a lot. And I love doing that. I've done it with my son a couple of times.
6 times in the last 10 years?
No, 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 no. It's only been a couple of no, it's been a couple of times in the last 10 years.
Okay.
But since I was 4 years old, I've driven cross country 6 times. But like I know the country fairly well, and we do a lot of work in the middle of the country. And it just seems to me that so much of what plagues the country politically, economically, environmentally is the degree to which the government incentivized suburbanization after World War II. We were actually a denser, more diverse country in a lot of ways prior to World War II than we were after. And it created a lot of the segregation, a lot of the problems we have today. And so the first book was really more of a technocratic manifesto, right, that basically argued the merits of density from like a policy point of view. Why, and you could prove it was better for the economy, for the environment, for a bunch of things. And then as I toured with that book, I got a kind of question both in red states and in blue states, like that was like, yeah, we get it, but the problem is most of the new urban density that we build around the country is soul crushing. It's terrible. And it's kind of the same blue glass tower with the same Starbucks at the bottom. And, that like, so we get the technocratic argument, but the argument doesn't, carry a lot of emotional weight. And I really started thinking about that as an architect. So this next book, the one that just came out, is really in some ways an argument with the first book. It doesn't contest the merits of density as much as it says it's more about the how
It's
than the what.
it's rethinking what density.
Yeah, and also the density, it's one thing to talk about towers in the context of, Long Island City or Manhattan or downtown Brooklyn, but there's a lot of parts of our city, I was testifying at Charter Revision last night, actually. There's a lot of parts of our city that are single family, lower density. Most of the country has cities that are made up of predominantly single family homes. Detroit, right? Indianapolis, like you can name city after city. And so the density models that are going to work there are going to be fundamentally different than what works, in the heart of Manhattan. And so this book it's a much more qualitative book, right? That is about why design matters and what design can do to bring us together as opposed to pulling us apart.
So, in your view, what are the two or three things that design can do best in order to? We're all grasping at straws for any way to bring us together, right? So, what are the two or three ways you
Yeah,
think?
and to me, good architecture and good urbanism is the antidote to the problems of social media. Social media, we now know it's not even contested that the algorithms are designed to put us in silos and have us argue with each other. Like we know that it's just stipulated. Our public spaces, the way we design our built environment, it seems to me, can be the exact opposite. So we did this thing after World War II where we actually designed for segregation, right? We built federal highways, they were subsidized, and then we built suburbs, at least in the beginning, that were designed to be racially and socially divided. Only certain people could get mortgages, right, that were of a certain race and class. And so, you had this extraordinary striation of society. And so, we don't have the time to go through all of urban history from 1945 to 1990, but things shift in the 90s dramatically. The service economy, crime comes down in cities. It's the time not just of Law and Order, but Seinfeld and Friends. And like all of a sudden, culturally, cities are cool again. And um, and with that comes, of course, this huge urban remigration. There's a lot of gentrification of communities that had stuck it out through the 70s and 80s. But what you find is like we now have an opportunity with people rediscovering cities and moving into cities, not just in New York and Boston, but all over the country. I mean, the numbers are through the roof all over the country, right? Of building parks and building buildings and building collective environments that actually not just like are nice places for an office worker to have lunch, but places where people who look differently, vote differently, pray differently can meet eyeball to eyeball and understand that that person is not a threat, that in fact that person's another human being, and that you share more in common than you don't. And I think that is the real value that great design can bring at this moment, in addition to, of course, the benefits to the climate, right? But so that's what the book really argues and lays out, is that those two big existential challenges of climate change and political division really should be looked at through the lens of the built environment, as well as all the other you know ideas that are pertinent to that.
So how do we bridge the gap between what sounds like great policy and profitability and incentivizing development in the manner that you're suggesting, or is that
Yeah.
already happening and we're not?
The funny thing is, one of the things the book goes through is a number of examples that are from the global south that have like far less, developed economies than we do. This is not about money. It's not about a lack of money. It's about a lack of imagination. Building, like, so when we're designing a building, we're constantly thinking about, like, where does the front door go? Where does the loading dock go? How does the building signal that people of all stripes are welcome? That's not a money issue. It's an attitude issue, right? And so, like, this is really, and that's one of the problems that we have in this country right now. In terms of the built environment, we think quality is about money,
Yeah, I
right?
thought I thought about it right away. So it's
Yeah, no,
usually ingrained problem.
it's become ingrained in the entire real estate community, unfortunately, right? And that's just, I mean, some of it is you need better architects who are capable of bringing quality without breaking the bank. But you also need a development community that has the attitude that says we have a responsibility greater than ourselves, and that includes building a great city and a great public realm. Because after all, if you don't do that, ultimately the value of all your investments are going to go down anyway. So it's all enlightened self-interest.
Right. Is this a model that you think only works well in underdeveloped cities, or is there a path to pursue this type of design in Manhattan?
I think it is it's an attitude that can extend anywhere, right? New York makes certain things easier. We're a city, not just Manhattan, but the entire city. We're used to walking. We use mass transit. We have a great idea about our park system, you know. So there's already this ethos of a kind of shared built environment. That's not true everywhere. We do a lot of work, as I said, in the middle of the country, in the industrial Midwest, where everyone is so focused on their car. And so, like, we have a bridge opening in Indianapolis this year that we designed that is, for the first time, more about pedestrians and bikes than it is about car traffic. And just, I think every project that we do, we look at as the opportunity to build a new kind of community center, whether it's a bridge or an office building or a museum or a college dormitory. It's the opportunity to bring people together and, like, mining for the spaces like an archaeologist that can bring people together regardless of the program. And again, I don't think that's a money thing. I think it's an attitude thing.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's also attitude of citizens, right? So like I think there's the when you think of bridge, for instance, I'll use what you just talked about. You think of, okay, that's how I drive my car over a body of water, right? Even though people might want to use it to walk over, bike over, exercise over, use it as a place to congregate. I would think that there needs to be an attitudinal adjustment to I don't know, convince people or show people that what they think should be the traditional way of bridge, apartment building, a meeting house, whatever it should look, doesn't have to be stuck in the mud. That it can be transformed. Is
We built a little canopy structure in a town called Columbus, Indiana, over the main intersection. And trucks can drive under it and functions as an intersection. But on nights and weekends, it is used as on a regular basis by different community groups for different festivals and stuff like that. And people are like, "Oh, what about the traffic?" and the traffic's fine, right? Like the cars know what to do, right? But thing is, you need the public space. And so it's just getting people to think about sometimes the spaces that already exist differently, right? And it is an attitude adjustment, but I think it's not as hard as it sounds. I think both younger people and a lot of older people are really seeking community today. And so giving them just a little bit of space, a little bit of a platform is enough to get them to then do what they are going to do in terms of bringing people together and gather.
Yeah. This is probably neither here nor there, but I don't know why it popped into my head. What popped into my head were growing up, you'd go to like a video store to get a DVD or a VHS tape, and you'd talk to the person at the front desk and ask for their recommendations, and you'd see your friends who were there also buying movies, and you talk about movies, and you talk about, and that's gone, right? Like that, that's totally gone because
Sure.
of Netflix and and streaming, and but other parts of our society are eroding in a similar manner.
To me, it's, so like especially during the pandemic, like we all got used to getting groceries delivered and all this stuff. But at the same time, like my office is near Union Square. Look at the Union Square Farmers Market on any given day, and it's overflowing with people. Movie theaters are still going strong, right? And so the thing is that we we operate under a false assumption that if you provide all the technological means for people to be a part, that people will choose to be a part over choosing some form of collective or communal experience. And just time and time again, that has proven to be untrue. I mean, the pandemic was the great example, right? So, all of a sudden we could all work from a mountaintop, or most of us could, right? And what's happening? Like one by one, every company is saying we need people to come back to the office, including the tech companies, right? And so right there, it just said, this is just the nature of our species, right? And so yes, there will always be inventions that you know erode. I don't know. They're going to make us do things differently, but I still think that we have a fundamental need to connect as a species, and that like we as designers design that space.
I'm not able to climb a mountain anyway, so I wasn't able to go to the top. I don't have the physical wherewithal to do it. I want to talk really quickly about Domino, in part because it's a fascinating project, in part because I was living in Williamsburg and watching it go up, and then watching it come to final fruition was stolen from me when my wife made us move to the suburbs.
Blame the wife.
I blamed her to her face, so she's not going to hear it for the first time. But uh, can you take us back to kind of how you first got involved with that project and what was enticing about it to you? I know you've worked on a variety of projects, but was there something different about that one when you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the person who makes it different. It was Jed Walentis. I mean, just an extraordinary thinker and builder. So I met Jed like around 2009, something like that. I was a partner at Shop at that point, and Shop and a landscape architecture firm called Field Operations, a partner there, Lisa Switkin. We did the master plan together, right, of bringing like the road through and the park, and we brought it through ULERP, um, and it was great to work on that master plan because that park does everything we've been talking about in this phone call. It really brings people of all different stripes together. And then after I formed POW, like within a few months of forming POW, Jed called me and said, it's time to work on the sugar refinery as a piece of architecture, and we need to get light in the building, and the windows don't line up. It's a long story, but basically my first impulse is the impulse that is the building, which is to build a building inside the building, right? What Justin Davidson called a bottle inside of a ship. Um, and that gap brings light in all the way down to the lowest office floor. And then Lisa, our landscape architect, had this genius idea of planting these pin oaks in the gap between the new and the old building. And so I think working in there is just an incredibly different experience. They had a slow start leasing, but it's going much better now. I think there's like that post-pandemic moment is over, and there's a lot of acceleration in the leases. And then the event space at the top and the way it meets the city at the bottom. To me, I'll tell you, the thing I love about that project the most is what I like to say is, when we've done a good piece of architecture, it pulls history forward into the future, right? So progress doesn't come at the cost of history. It works with our narratives. And so the last thing I worked on like that was really powerful was when I worked at the city on the High Line. And the High Line and Domino have a certain similarity. They're kind of objects of desire for New Yorkers. They're things that we instantly recognize, and yet they've been transformed for a new and different New York. So they are both about the past and the future. And that, I think, is a really powerful way to think about how our cities grow, as opposed to this idea of wiping things out and starting with a clean slate.
You know what's really interesting? This didn't occur to me until you said it. Um, if you probably asked 50 bored Manhattanites and 50 bored Brooklynites, what should we do today? 20 to 70-year-olds, anywhere in the age range, what should we do? I feel like the most common answer for each of the 50 data set is Highline and Domino Park. And there has to be a reason for that. And it must be, in part, the beautiful architecture. I don't want to give short shrift to that in any way, but I think the community aspect, and the fact that that there are going to be people there of all types, shapes, sizes, colors, bustling activity, happy people doing fun things together outside is part of the reason why.
I mean, we have a ton of examples of this in the city now. Rock Center, Central Park, all of our waterfronts, Brooklyn Bridge Park, the list goes on. And all those places, I think, share, again, this idea in common that they are part of the history of the city, but they also carry the future with them. I mean, the Central Park today is not the Central Park that was built in the middle of the 1800s. It's transformed radically, and with the buildings around it have transformed radically. Rock Center is in a whole new stage in its evolution, and so that to me is one of the great. There's a fancy word called palimpsest, which all it means is just the layering of history, and to me that's super important, that people see their past reflected in the future.
Right. Yeah, you're not just wiping the slate clean and starting over.
Yeah.
You're building on top of what's really worked well in the past, and the culture that we spent the last 250 years building in this country, right?
Right.
I think that's incredible. When you were designing Domino Sugar, you talk about and I think we didn't mention the phrase, but we kind of talked about the concept of social friction. Were there specific things that you were thinking about as you were developing the space to kind of incorporate? Well, first, what is social friction, and then how did you?
So the book talks about this idea of positive social friction. So, like, if you think about the tech world, a lot of what you hear about is the elimination of friction. That you're trying to make things more seamless. In urbanity, I think it's about this idea that there is a certain positive friction that happens in our cities when people who are, again, different from each other interact, right? And so a great example is the playground at Domino, where you see the kids from the Hasidic community and the African American community and the Latin American community and like the hipsters who live in a different part of Williamsburg, and all their kids are playing together.
There are hipsters in Williamsburg still?
Right, there still are. And it's like, seeing that, to me, and seeing that extraordinary kind of mix of people, I think is super. I'm naive enough to believe, if you think about all of the tension in the Middle East today, that those kids will, when they're adults, will have a different worldview because they'll have played in that playground. They will actually understand each other as human beings because they've had that chance to interact eye to eye. I think that's incredibly important for the world we live in right now. And so, the building does this in certain ways, but, parks have an outsized ability to do this. And in fact, it was, Olmsted, who was the landscape architect of Central Park, called it a social condenser. And it was always in his ideas that parks could serve as this means of bringing people of difference together. And so that's what the positive social friction thing means. And again, working on that, a lot in the middle of the country, because when you get into car culture, cars just have this natural tendency to segregate people and like pool people into like kinds and tribes. And, the whole idea of getting people into that desire for serendipity, that desire for difference,
Yeah.
uh, I think is fundamental.
The interesting piece about that park is we've gone back to Williamsburg and visited with our two young kids, and unlike some other parks that have kind of a siloed feel, like swing sets or a slide where one person can go down at a time. This particular park, it all feels interconnected. It's like there's that rope bridge or whatever it is, that rope
Yep.
climbing, where like you almost have to help each other in order to navigate it. And parents are watching together and laughing together and
Right.
talking about it together and making sure their kid doesn't kill themselves together.
I should remember the name of the artist that designed the main kind of jungle gym structure at Domino Park, and the name's just not coming to me, because the entire thing is meant to be a kind of microcosm of the larger park. Um, and so a lot of really smart minds designed that park. I was involved in the master plan. We're very proud of the fact, for example, that the master plan connects the street grid up, so
Yeah.
you can just very, very naturally and organically walk into Domino from any direction, and it's just a continuation of the carpet of the city. Um, but then the design of the landscape and the design of the park is really Lisa, and again, some artists that were involved in various aspects of it. I think just did a stellar job.
Yeah, I'll tell him that you forgot his or her name after we get off the podcast. What's you obviously have a strong connection to New York City. You worked in the government. You've helped design some amazing parts of New York City. What's the future of architecture? And we're sitting here talking in 10 years. What's the next big project that is going to have an impact on the landscape of the city?
Well, we are at a red flag moment. We are losing population for the first time since the 1970s. And that's because of our affordability crisis, because we're not generating enough housing. Like I said, I testified last night at the Charter Revision Commission. I think we have to make workforce housing as of right in this city, right? So we did a big op-ed in the New York Times about a year ago about how to house 1 million more New Yorkers and do it within the character of the city. And I think sometimes our world gets so focused on building big towers in Manhattan and Brooklyn and stuff that we did a research project. We found that there's more than 10,000 sites available that are either vacant parking lot sites or one-story taxpayers that can be redeveloped for housing, that are near mass transit, out of the flood zone. And a lot of them want either mid-scale or small-scale development on them. And the idea that those things would have to go through a rezoning is
Yeah,
madness, right? And so so this to me isn't an architectural project per se. It's a major urban design project to rethink how we entitle housing in this city. Because we're always going to have Euler fights over really big projects like Hudson Yards and stuff like that. But you know, like that, or like take the sliver buildings in Central Park South. That has absolutely nothing to do with our housing crisis. Our housing crisis is about the fact that we cannot generate affordable housing for middle class people in this city, and we need to subsidize even people with decent incomes in order to be able to live here. And so that to me is the biggest effort. There is a design element to it. It is this thing of how do you design new housing that knits into communities rather than is in the face of communities. And I think there's a way to do that. Like we have a big all affordable housing project in East New York right now, right? Went through Euler, was very, very popular with the community. We did very well with the local council member. It was not NIMBY at all. And I think a lot of it had to do with the way we broke down the scale, used materials that people wanted. And, so there is a way to do it and navigate these things. But that project will take 9 years from inception to the first family living in it. For a project that was really very popular with the community within a year of it being proposed. And that's nuts, right? And so we've really got to change the way we approve housing because it's too regulated, and too much of the low scale and mid scale stuff that could really be the engine of affordable housing in this city is trapped in the quagmire of zoning. And so, that's, I think, a major project. Of course, the transportation system. And then I have to end with Penn Station, of course, which has been a project that's been near and dear to my heart for 20 years now. And I think we're going to make some progress in the coming year. But, busiest transportation hub in the Western Hemisphere, totally unsafe. It's about to get new tunnels across the Hudson, so even more people coming into it. It needs to be radically transformed, not just for it, but for the neighborhood around it that could also be radically transformed. Because right now it's the poor step cousin of Midtown.
Yeah, well, at least you can get good food in the terminal now, but everything else you're saying still resonates.
Look, we've done this with Grand Central, we did it with Bryant Park, we did it with Columbus Circle. We know how to do this, and the city and real estate generally becomes much wealthier when we do it, right? So it's not a money question, right? It's a question of political will and imagination.
Well, count me maybe not totally optimistic that political will and imagination is going to be our saving grace, but let's cross our fingers and hope. And you seem like the right man for the job to help push the needle forward. So we'll have to have you come back on in a year or so and see how things are going, and talk about your next cross country trip. Okay.
All right. Terrific.
People want to hear more about you, see your work, buy your book. Where should they go?
You can go to our website to see our work, pau.studio, pau.studio. And the book is on Amazon. If you just Google me, you'll see both books. The book is called The Architecture of Urbanity. You can also get it at Princeton University Press, which is the publisher's website.
Awesome. Vishaan, thanks again. We really appreciate it.
All right, good. Take care.
For more on all things real estate and the law, subscribe to this and our other podcasts. Follow Bergstein, Flynn, Knowlton, and Polina on social media. Subscribe to our newsletter and go to bfklawoffice.com. That's bfklawoffice.com to learn more.